Blake Baker, the former Missouri defensive coordinator, now the new LSU defensive coordinator, switched and went back to where his wife is from, actually, Joe, she played soccer at LSU. They come back to LSU where he was in 2021 as the linebackers coach, making him the highest paid assistant in the country, $2.5 million in a 3-year contract for Blake Baker. When you saw the news, and I know that we had talked about it on Wednesday, that I'd started hearing some stuff, and we had talked about it there. When you saw the news go final, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, I feel like we already kind of knew where this thing was going. And, it sounded like how quickly his name emerged as a potential candidate. It was pretty clear that he was going to end up there. Weirdly, there's a contingency of people that believe that this isn't a good hire. I don't understand any of those people that don't think that this isn't a fantastic move to go get Blake Baker. Missouri defensively had no right being as good as they were over, this past year and improving. That they transitioned and developed and played at a very high level very quickly. And despite having some games where they lost and looked like shit, like the way that they played against LSU, the way that they played against Georgia, there were still a lot of bright spots. There were still a lot of bright spots for Blake Baker in this defense. I think this is huge. This is massive for them. Now, the price tag, you got to spend money to go get him. I hope it works out and they're not paying another buyout, but it's still a fantastic move.
I don't think LSU cares. That's why, really? Joe, when you talked about Mike Denbrock and people in Notre Dame saying that LSU would not match that, like, and even people that I talked to around here, Joe, that was complete horseshit. I mean, like, LSU is not. I promise you, LSU is not the place where if you want to get in a bidding war, they will go toe to toe with you. There's a reason they're constantly in top 5, top 7 in recruiting. There's a reason that they've won or second in national championships behind Alabama since 2003. I mean, they will spend the money. I said this on my LSU show. I really like the move because, like you mentioned, Joe, when we were talking about it in the preseason, I picked Missouri as the second team in the East for me. And the reasoning then that I will continue to say now is not Luther Burden. It wasn't Brady Cook. It wasn't what they had at running back with Schaefer and all. Like, none of that mattered to me because I knew that they would be better offensively. Blake Baker got Eli Drinkwitz off the hot seat because of what they did defensively, right? Like, even in the loss against Georgia, Joe, like, that was the first time that we had seen Georgia, and back-to-back years, I might add, where, yeah, they ultimately were able to break through because of a talent barrier between Georgia and Missouri, excuse me. But it wasn't because Blake Baker didn't absolutely dominate that game. Both of those games, both of the toughest teams that he played, he dominated in, meaning Blake Baker and the defense. I think it's an excellent hire for the Bayou Bengals. I think it's one that came with a little assistance in reference to, him already being here and the connections that they have here and Brian Kelly asking people about Blake Baker. But, Joe, we saw, the transformation that he had for a guy in like Damone Clark in 2021 and the legacy went there. I think the biggest winner in all this is not LSU. I think it's Harold Perkins. I 1,000% believe that Harold Perkins, who was out of position so many times this year, not playing in his right roles, this defense does have talent in areas, Joe. And I think what we've seen from LSU offensively the last 2 years, you get a defense that actually can be, just middle of the pack and start working their way up. LSU could find themselves back in the playoff.
I also don't think that there's much of a talent gap between the current LSU defense and Missouri's defense last year. I know that's could possibly piss some people off by making that statement. There really isn't. I think there was a lot of misplaced and miscoached players last year on LSU's defense. I remember you posting these clips and stuff last year or this past season of guys being misaligned, guys getting blown off the ball. Like, that shit comes down to Matt House and his coaching and his scheme. I think that Blake Baker, for what he did with pieces, talented pieces, good athletes that needed the right coaching and the right delivery, he got them to play it at a high level. And I think that LSU is not far off from that group of guys from Missouri that he got to play as well as they did. I also think a huge part to this, I understand that Eli Drinkwitz is the head coach, and the head coach is the biggest cog in recruiting. But the guys that he has attracted, Blake Baker is the defensive coordinator, that were interested in playing for his defense. The 5-star recruits that were willing to come be a part of Missouri, that is going to be even more for the long term of other players that they're going to be able to get to come to LSU.
Well, it's interesting because now Eli does have to make a move. I mean, this isn't just an LSU show. Now he's got to go find a DC. We'll talk about that when he makes his.
Yeah.
But I just think for me that you had a guy that helped bring a team back to some form of relevance in Missouri. And look, every time you hire a coach, there's a trickle effect. And here is a trickle effect that happens for Mizzou. One thing I'll point out to you here, Joe, Brian Kelly has, Matt House excluded. Brian, and I'm going to talk about this on my show on Tuesday. Brian Kelly has had a very good track record of defensive coordinators, right? Matt House being the one that kind of got away a little bit, but you have 3 head coaches. You have one in Mike Elko, another one in Clark Lee, and then now Marcus Freeman, is a head coach at Notre Dame. I don't think that that can be overlooked by some of the guys that he has coached, and them all being head coaches too in the SEC.
He does have a good coaching tree. I jokingly brought up Brian Van Gorder the other day and all that stuff. So here's the only thing I will say. When he misses really, really freaking bad. I'm not trying to take a dig.
AKA Matt House.
Matt House and Brian Van Gorder. It's not like when he misses, it's a guy who's like really average, and it's like, the defense could be a little bit better. Like, I feel like with Bama, the times that they've had a bad defensive coordinator or a bad offensive coordinator, it's just been like, it's not as good as it usually is, for example, oh my God, why am I blanking on
Bill O'Brien?
No. The current Ole Miss defensive coordinator. Holy shit.
Pete Golding.
Like Pete Golding's a good example. Just didn't really fit. Still had a good defense. But that was one of his. Think about it though. That's one of his worst defensive coordinators in the past decade, and he still had great numbers and is doing great things at Ole Miss.
Had like 4 top 15 defenses.
Right. That's my whole point. Is that when he misses, it's just a guy that doesn't really fit. When Brian Kelly's missed, they are dumpster level bad, like dumpster horrible level bad. I'm not saying that Blake Baker is going to be bad. That's not what I'm trying to get at. But we just got to be a little careful that sometimes, the floor falls out.
Well, and here's another thing. Blake Baker, here's the ultimate thing, and I'll wrap it up with this, that I think changes. Look, Joe, we've seen from Brian Kelly, whether Notre Dame, LSU, taking it, just take your bias or what you think out of him. Offensively, they've done good things. I mean, look what they did this year. I mean, he's a really good offensive coach. I think for Brian Kelly, he wants to be with the quarterbacks and be on the offensive side of the football. He's that kind of CEO. Where Nick is with the defense, he wants a defensive coordinator that can run it. The biggest problem that LSU had this year was not necessarily always personnel. It was culture. And Blake Baker, as soon as he steps off the plane and gets to football ops in Baton Rouge, the culture completely changes. And that is what I think you pay the $2.5 million to go get. Like, hey, man, you're on the preface. Look, you just saw what Garrett Nussmeier just did, Joe. The last time we saw him in meaningful action, against Wisconsin, he threw for 395. The time before that, he threw for 300 yards and a half against Georgia, the national championship winner, and a half. Okay? Offensively, they're there. And I see in the chat somebody said only if Brian Kelly could recruit. Well, it kind of leads me to my next point. Joe, the 2025, number 1 player in the country, Bryce Underwood, committed yesterday to the Bayou Bengals. LSU got the number 1 player in the country. They are now the number 1 class in the country per On3. Let me just say this. I do think Brian Kelly had some assistance on this one, obviously, with a really good recruiter in Joe Sloan, the quarterback's coach. He might be their next OC too. Who knows? But Jane Daniels opened the doorway for a guy like Bryce Underwood to come here. Joe Burrow opened the door for a guy like Bryce Underwood to come here, right? Those two dudes, regardless if they've ever talked to Bryce Underwood a day in their life, I think is a big reason why he commits to LSU like he did yesterday.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how that quarterback room is going to really shape up, and who might eventually hop in the portal and leave, and what ends up happening with that. Because I was looking at it after he committed, I'm like, damn, they got a lot of highly recruited quarterbacks that are in this room. I wonder who actually sticks around. But
none of them not named Bryce Underwood. I'll promise you that.
Right. Yeah, it's not hard to recruit quarterbacks when you have a guy who just won the national championship, especially when you're recruiting a guy that's also a good athlete. Similarity in traits to Jane Daniels. Brian Kelly now has a huge advantage for recruiting that position, recruiting skill position players. He's about to put out 2 first-round picks at receiver and quarterback.
Right.
It's not going to be hard. It's not going to be hard.
Here. Never is here. If we're just being honest, it never really is. And I do think that Brian, look, there's been a lot of negativity surrounding Brian Kelly. I think, Joe, the last 3 commits that they've gotten, 3 of them have been 5 stars. Dominic McKinley, okay, Harlan Berry for 2025, the number 1 running back in the country. Now they also have the number 1 wide receiver who committed on our show, by the way, you might add. Corian Moore, he's the number 1 wide receiver, and now the number 1 quarterback. Joe, those are all offensive pieces. The question becomes for Brian Kelly is simple. Joe, Blake Baker's the biggest hire at LSU he will make, because he's on the preface of getting somewhere that he's going to be every year and turning that page at LSU. Or, like you mentioned, Blake Baker falls on his face and they're not as good as they need to be, but offensively they are. I do think they're on the cusp of something. I think there's a lot of negativity surrounding Brian Kelly because of it. Let's see what they do there.
Should we hit the super chat from our friend Beef Stick?
I saw that. I have not read it, but I saw the avatar, so I wanted to. So Beef Stick on YouTube with a $4.99 super chat says,
I love our listeners. I love that this is because I personally identify with people who do shit like this, like the profile picture, the name, everything. I mean, this is fucking awesome. But go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm not even going to look at the guy, the avatar in the eye. I can't do it. If you don't know what this is a photo of, just how do you not know? He says, I love Notre Dame, but Blake, your takes on them are far superior to Joe's. He needs a reality check. Michigan will win the national title. Got a feeling they win by 17.
Come on, man. How are you a Notre Dame fan rooting for Michigan? We can't have this. Come on, Beef Stick.
Well, I think so here's the thing, Joe, and this is a good casual thing to talk about. When you're on either making picks or just even on a show like ours, when does reality become not picking against your team's biggest rival? Like, dude, how many times all year did I tell you that I thought Alabama was going to make the playoffs? Do you think that it makes me feel good? Like, do you really think that my fat ass wants to come out here every week and say, I think Alabama's good? Do you really think that? Because here's the newsflash. I don't like them sons of the bitches.
Well, okay, but I picked against Michigan the whole year. I'm just not picking against them in this game. It's pained me a little bit to have to root for Michigan, but have I thought that they were the better team when they played Alabama? Did I think that they were the better team in a lot of the matchups they have? Did I pick them over Ohio State when you didn't pick them over Ohio State? Yeah, absolutely. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number 1 source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.